Once I started fly casting, every time I caught a fish on anything but a fly rod, I just felt like I had missed an opportunity to have caught that fish on a fly rod.
And I'm sitting there, could somebody please put a rod in the water?
I like to think that fly fishing saved my life, and fly fishing became a passion in which I could become completely absorbed, and it really helped me through a tough time, and I'll always appreciate that about fly fishing.
The Chief Justice and I sat there. Whoop, there's a flag up. We both run to the flag, run to the trap, and I go, "Oh, you take it. It's probably some little chub or something." She pulls in the biggest bass of the day.
Welcome to the Flyline Podcast, where we enjoy the interesting stories behind the legendary guides and luminaries connected to Maine fishing. I'm Michael Jones. Today, we'll be talking with our special guest, Evelyn King. Evelyn King lives in Cundy's Harbor with her supportive and handsome and talented husband, Bruce. Evelyn is a household name in contemporary Maine fly fishing and is a member of the Sebago chapter of Trout Unlimited. Evelyn worked with her chapter of TU to help create the Maine Women Fly Fishers Group. In 2015, Evelyn earned her Certified Casting Instructor certification with the Federation of Fly Fishers to support her work in guiding as well as introducing women into the sport with Casting for Recovery, a fly fishing weekend retreat program for women who have been diagnosed or are recovering from breast cancer. In this warm and honest conversation I had with Evelyn, she shares stories about her life growing up in a family of boat builders, her college experience at Bowdoin College as an athlete and scholar, and sharing her transition in her early professional life as a paralegal, supporting the legal community with her unique expertise in real estate law and transactions. Evelyn is the quintessential Mainer that always strives to support the people around her through her careful influence, be it as a mentor, an instructor, a guide, or as a supporting friend. Evelyn shares some great history about her family's connection to an iconic Maine summer camp, as well as her family's historical connection to the early roots of the YMCA. Sit back and enjoy as Evelyn unfolds her story of a life spent fishing, casting, and helping others heal and learn through her influence. It comes with great admiration, honor, and full-hearted appreciation to introduce the Flyline Podcast audience to join along and listen as Evelyn King shares her unique and colorful life story in this heartfelt episode. Evelyn King, welcome to the Flyline Podcast.
Oh, I am honored that you asked. Thank you very much. This is great. Fun to have you visit my office here in Cundy's Harbor.
Yeah.
We're overlooking Cromwell Cove, and but this specific room is where I do my fly tying and store my fishing equipment and all my casting equipment. But it's just a pleasure to be here, and I have heard so many of your podcasts. I haven't listened to all of them, but I've really enjoyed them. I commend you for what you're doing.
That makes me feel wonderful to hear that, and I'll share that with Sherry. As she does the edit, I'm sure she'll hear those words right from your mouth. But yeah, so Evelyn, we are sitting here in your office, and we're surrounded with spools of thread. We're surrounded with your fly casting novellas, all the books of the greats. We share a very similar library. And also we share a infatuation with fly tying, because I can see these totes just full of jungle cock and whatnot. And I think you and I share a passion.
Yes.
And I'm just blown away that we haven't met until today, because we have so many mutual friends like Rod McGarry and Macaulay Lord,
right,
and other people that will go unmentioned that we talked about earlier before we started recording, like a doctor that we share. It's things like that. So it's a small world, and it's an absolute pleasure to finally sit down with you. And I know that the Flyline podcast audience will recognize very quickly that you are a natural fit as someone that should tell their story.
Oh, nice of you to say that. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on. Evelyn, your childhood, I know that we've talked about it when we spoke before, but you have a very colorful story with your family history. Tell me about your family.
I was born in Montreal. My father is Canadian, and my father was Canadian. My mother is American, and they both went to McGill University. And so they started their family in Montreal. And then when I was 12, my father decided to sell his family's construction company, Houston Construction. He decided to sell that because he really wanted to get into boat building. And it was right when separatist movement was going on, and trying to run a business as an English-speaking Canadian in Montreal became very difficult. He tried to start the boat building business in Montreal and quickly realized that he would be better off bringing the family and the business to Maine. And my mother had grown up in a lot of her life in Maine, so there was a natural connection. So we moved to Raymond Cape, overlooking Sebago Lake, and he started the boat company Sabre Yachts. And by the time he was done with Sabre Yachts, I think they built 1,600 boats between 28 feet to 45 feet. And so I can remember the day that we started cutting down the trees for the company building, all the excitement of starting something new for my dad. And while he was doing that, I went off to Exeter Academy, and then I went on to Bowdoin.
Okay, stop. I have too many questions before we go down that road. Sabre Yachts I drive by every day. I did not know that your family started that company. So if you're floating around in Casco Bay and this absolute Ferrari goes by you out on between the islands, and it's big, and Captain Spaghetti is running it, that's probably a Sabre Yacht or a Hinckley. Sabre Yacht is recognized worldwide as one of the finest boats in the world. So your father,
my father,
started Sabre Yacht.
Yes, and he designed the boat. Wow. He designed all the boats, and at the end of his time with Sabre Yachts, he was just getting into the power boats. He started the Sabre lines and designed those. I can remember him with the plans in the living room there was a big desk in the back of the living room, and he would be just sketching by hand. A lot of the stuff was by hand, just researching and designing.
Did he have a maritime background?
He was an engineer at McGill. His father had Houston Construction, which they built pavilions for Expo 67, a lot of the commercial buildings in Montreal. So he got into that business and learned a lot, but his heart was always sailing. He was a big sailor from the time he was younger.
Yeah, and so a natural question, Evelyn, sorry to interrupt. At that time, were they building boats out of wood, or because I know they're all they're all fiberglass now?
He started building wooden boats in his basement when he was a kid, but once they started Sabre, it was fiberglass. Yeah, and I remember I grew up with the smell of fiberglass because in the early days when I was little, they were building boats in the basement. Mm-hmm. He and his buddies were building ice boats, ice sailing boats, and so the smell of fiberglass was everywhere. But yes, in Sabre it was fiberglass from day one.
And I still see on my way to work every day in Jordan Bay, which is right where you're talking about, ice boats.
Oh yeah,
because the snow really never really lays down on the ice. There's quite a little community of ice boaters that are out there. That's so cool, Evelyn. I didn't know that. And I love how this stuff all comes out in these conversations. All right, now you have my permission to talk about Exeter Academy.
Okay.
So you went on.
I went on. So I was at 2 years at Wyndham High School, and I think that my parents were interested in having me have a different opportunity. I also had met this young fellow, Bruce, who I'm now married to. And I think they were hoping that if they sent me away to school, I would move on.
From Bruce?
Well, just get see other people,
sure,
and have other experiences. And it was their mistake because I was at Exeter, and it was the most remarkable experience. But because I was away at school, he could come down and visit me. And so we kept that wonderful connection. And he's always been my number one supporter. He loves to fish, be outdoors, everything I love to do, he loves to do. He was the one that got me running in the first place, which we ran marathons together. Skiing, we skied in marathons together. Everything outdoors was because of him. So back to Exeter. I loved Exeter. I learned a lot there. One of the things I really appreciated about Exeter was that we dealt with primary sources. And it was the Harkness table. So we're all sitting around, maybe 20 of us around this big table, and the teacher's one of us at the table. And the teacher will ask a couple questions, but the whole class is very involved in discussing the topic. And because we dealt with primary sources, let's say we were talking about the Civil War, we might read a story by someone from the North and then someone from the South. And then we would bring that discussion to the table, and we would try to unravel what was going on with both sides having an equal value, trying to see it and form our own opinion rather than reading a textbook that said, this is what you should believe about the Civil War.
That's so funny. You know how it relates to the dialogue in politics today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I so often in today, when I have discussions, I try never to have discussions with politics with people because it's uncomfortable in this day and age. But I'll say, like, to one of my daughters, isn't it interesting that what you hear on the radio is so different from what I hear?
That's right.
And there are two sources, but unfortunately, even now, you don't get the primary sources. You get two opinions. And in today's society, it's rare that we get to hear the real facts. So that's what I loved about Exeter. And I did a lot of running at Exeter. I was captain of the track team. And that at the same time, we'll get back to it. The summer, I spent summers at summer camp.
Yeah. Evelyn, can you bring me back to when we were talking before, when you were growing up in Raymond, brothers and sisters?
Right.
Yeah. So tell me about your family.
My mother, who I haven't really spoken about yet, was very much an outdoors person, very athletic, liked to hike and climb and bird watch. And she was a camp director, so very community building. And then there were three of us. I have an older sister, 2 years older, and then a younger brother who's 7 years younger. Okay. And my brother is now out in Idaho. He went to school at UNH and then left for a year to ski at Jackson Hole and never came back. And my sister now lives in Brunswick. She went off to art school and has done a lot of graphic design. And I'm right in the middle.
You are. That's great. Bowdoin College?
So Bowdoin was a continuation from Exeter. But it was interesting because what I learned at Exeter about time management, at Exeter, I wanted to spend weekends with Bruce when I could. So I became very studious and disciplined about when I studied and how much I got done before the weekend. And I did well at Exeter. So it all worked out wonderfully. And then I got to Bowdoin and it was sort of this big, the pressure was off. And I've heard this from other people that go to prep school, so that sometimes you get to college and it's a lot of people that are going into college, it's their first experience in that realm. And I'd had 2 years that were so intense. And so I couldn't go to a class at Exeter without being fully prepared because you were called on to contribute every single class. Whereas when I got to Bowdoin, it's much more independent and you're given your assignments, but you can sit back and
you're listening to a
lecture. And so you're getting out of it what you want to put into it, which was such a nice thing in a way, but it wasn't as challenging right off the bat. Now, I made it work for me, and I really enjoyed Bowdoin a lot. I ended up deciding to take as many classes that interested me and not go down the rabbit hole, which was not characteristic at the time. But I took anthropology, sociology, economics, religion, art history, went through everything that I could. And I found that art and art history were the classes that I loved the best. And I think that's when I realized that my natural love is making things with my hands. So I actually, by the time I had to pick a major, I already had fulfilled the major because I had taken all the art classes that were required. And so I did my thesis on pottery, and there were no pottery classes at Bowdoin. So there was an independent pottery shop in Brunswick behind what's now Hannaford's near the grain store. And I was working there, and then I took classes. I arranged through Bowdoin to get credit for classes at Bates and Mecca, which was Maine College of Art, I think back then.
Yes.
And then I worked independently, and I put on a pottery show end of my tenure. I got through Bowdoin in 3.5 years.
Oh,
so,
congratulations. Yeah.
yeah. But while I was at Bowdoin, I was very involved with the athletics and with track and cross country. I was co-captain of both several years. In fact, Joni was there at the time. Joni and I were friends from prior to that. When I was at Wyndham, she ran at Cape Elizabeth. We ran against each other and our families knew each other. But it was fun to be at Bowdoin when she was there. And I remember the coach sitting her down at one of the meetings and trying to discourage her from running in her first marathon. And I just can clearly remember him saying, you don't want to do this, it'll interfere with the rest of your track season. And that was the marathon that she did so unbelievably well in. So the Boston Marathon.
You said Joni, but would you, for the listeners, explain who you're really talking about?
Well, it's Joni Benoit Samuelson.
Right.
And she ended up going to the Olympics with the marathon. She's been a good friend all along, more from the periphery, although when we had our children at the same time, we did a play group together for years and years, and we would get together once a week. But anyway, she was running when I was running, and I did cross country. I loved cross country. And then in the winter, I would cross country ski.
For Bowdoin?
So, well, Bowdoin didn't have a women's team.
No. I forgot. They were just Alpine.
Yeah. They had a loosely formed cross country club team, and I loved that. But it really only formed, I think, one of my last years. But I would ski on the weekends with Bruce. That's when we were doing, the Middlebury ski marathons. We did a bunch of marathons, in the winter.
Mm-hmm. So you got out of college, you're working with ceramics and pottery. Where are you living?
Well, Bruce bought a house. It was like a gentleman's farmhouse in Brunswick when I was in school. He actually had been living in Raymond and he moved to Brunswick when I went to Bowdoin. And he bought this farmhouse that's up on a hill. It was built in the 1880s, I think. Definitely, a gentleman. It was a nice old house, had this massive barn out behind. And so after school, that's where we lived. We got married not long after I graduated. But it was funny because I planned on being a professional potter and I had a internship all lined up. I graduated finished in December. I was going to graduate in June, and I had the whole plan. I knew where I was going to work and what I was going to learn, and I think it was sheepskin pottery. But I was going to start in the spring, and then in the meantime, between December and the spring, I decided to take a part-time job working for a sports shop at the Tontine Mall in Brunswick, and just, we're selling running gear and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, the job for to apprentice as a potter fell through.
Oh.
Things changed with the family, and I wasn't able to do that. And so I'm sitting behind a cashier's desk saying, this is not what I went to Bowdoin to do. What the heck am I going to do? Because I wasn't ready to go out on my own doing pottery. And so I thought about, since I'd had the rug pulled out from under me as a potter, I thought about what kind of profession I could do where I was guaranteed to always have a job. And I looked around and saw that there were more lawyers than most any other business in the Brunswick, Bath, Portland area. And I thought, okay, so if I can figure out how to support law firms, I'll be golden. So I enrolled at Beals College at the time, which became part of UMaine, a paralegal certificate program.
Good for you.
And at the same time, I started taking classes to be a real estate broker and realized that real estate was my passion. So then I started knocking on doors, and one of the firms in Bath, Fitzgerald Donovan Conley and Day, one of the lawyers was John Moncure, who went to Bowdoin, and Jim Day, who went to Bowdoin, and I think there were might have been another Bowdoin connection. I knocked on their door blindly and said, I'm here. I want to work for you. I don't really have any skills, but I'm taking a paralegal program, and I'm willing to take on any job you have as long as you will consider letting me be a paralegal when I'm certified. And they gave me a job. They weren't hiring
How did you know, Evelyn, that this was, I mean, did you have an exposure to an experience? Did you experience a real estate transaction or some legal experience that made you say, because you sound like you had both feet firmly planted on the ground when you made that decision?
No, I think I just did it from a practical point of view. And what is interesting is that landing in that real estate part of law became a lifetime passion. And I don't know, because at that time we hadn't dabbled too much in real estate professional from a family point of view, but I have always, well, I like research.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a learner. I love a lifetime learner. And as soon as I got into the real estate broker's class and the paralegal class, I didn't even care at that point. I would have gone into litigation. I actually did some part-time work for Beryl and Dana when in the bowels of Bath Iron Works when the whole asbestos thing was going on.
Sure. Yeah.
That might have been my very first inkling. But then so I started with Fitzgerald Donovan Conley and Day at the time. Buzz Fitzgerald was the chief counsel for Bath Iron Works and a really wonderful teacher, gave me so much opportunity to learn on my own. And when one of the real estate lawyers left to start his own law firm in Brunswick, they didn't hire a new real estate lawyer. They left that position open and pretty much threw it at me like, Evelyn, you've had experience with real estate and you've done some title abstracting. So why don't you keep doing that and we'll make do. And eventually over a period of a few years, we just got to the point where I was doing an awful lot of different things with real estate.
Can I take you away from that for just a minute?
Yeah.
I'm trying to picture, what is your partner doing at this point?
Bruce is a lobsterman.
I don't know.
Yeah. Bruce, so when I met Bruce, he was building houses. He was doing construction. When I went to Bowdoin, he moved up to Brunswick and decided that he wanted to lobster.
Good for him.
And so he was in this house in Brunswick, but made friends with Bob Waddle and the family, Kellogg Lobster. And he started lobstering out of there, started in a very small boat and quickly found that he'd found his passion and, just kept upsizing his boats over time. And Bob Waddle was a great friend and mentor. So the whole time he is lobstering, and he got to the point where I feel like he had like 1,400 traps. It was before the trap limit came down to 800. He was bringing them back to the house in the winter, truckload after truckload of traps piled high in our yard in Brunswick. And so he had the outdoor job and I had the desk job at the time. And that's how it worked. And he kept lobstering until he only stopped lobstering 5 years or so ago.
Oh, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
I've noticed, I lived in Harpswell for just under 10 years. You'll never see a lobsterman's pickup truck parked in front of a therapist's office. They have the best job on earth.
Yeah.
And it looks like dirty work, but apparently there's just something really therapeutic about being on the ocean every day.
Yeah.
And they will never quit.
Well, that's what I think most of Bruce's friends were surprised that he, quote unquote, retired because they usually don't. Most of his friends haven't.
Yeah. And it's like beautiful. I mean, Harpswell, of course, is the Neck, the islands, and then Cundy's Harbor, which is where we are. And each one of them is a little different. Yeah. Right. And what do you like about living in Harpswell?
Oh, I love being passionate about being on the water, being on the ocean. The people in Harpswell are wonderful. And I think our first introduction was through the Waddle family and through different lobstermen. And so the salt of the earth, all our friends that we knew were involved in the lobstering community, just the salt of the earth, and would do anything for anybody. Yes. Bob Waddle pretty much adopted Bruce and would, took him on hunting trips and fishing trips and just was always there sort of to back him up, which was great. But we quickly realized when Bruce was lugging his traps back and forth to Brunswick that at some point we wanted to get a wharf or some access to the ocean where he could store his traps. And so we started looking for real estate back in 1984. We started looking around and had a number of false starts. And then we found, Bruce read in the Portland Press Herald that this fellow was trying to sell a 2-acre lot right here in Cromwell Cove in Harpswell. And Bruce saw it in the Sunday paper and called him up, and the next day we came to look at it. And it was perfect because it was deep water frontage, in a private area, sort of in the end of Cundy's Harbor. So we went under contract, but found when we did our due diligence that it wasn't a buildable lot. We couldn't get a perk test. And so we were really disappointed and walked away from the deal. And this was after about a month of thinking that we were going to move down to Harpswell. And we thought about it for a couple of days and we said, what we really wanted in the beginning was a wharf, a place to put the traps. Let's offer a ridiculously low amount of money for this property because the seller is all of a sudden quite desperate to sell because he has an unbuildable lot. And let's offer him a small amount of money and just plan on using it for a wharf. And we did that. And lo and behold, in 1998 or 99, so we'd owned the property since 86, 1999, we got Al Frick to come back down. He's a soil scientist for the state. And because I'd been in touch with him over the years, and I said, if ever any of the laws change on the amount of soil, can you come back down and do another test? And I called him up in 1998 and said, so what do you think? He says, well, they just changed the rules by an inch. Why don't I come back down? He came back down and he said, you've got a perkable lot.
Right. So perkable lot means that you can drill for water.
It means you can have septic.
Hey, you can have septic.
Septic.
So what Evelyn's not saying is that Harpswell in its almost entirety is rock.
Mm.
There's not a lot of topsoil. And so the power goes out here constantly because when the wind even blows slightly, the trees fall down because there's not a lot of deep root structure. And there's a real challenge to living out here. You must have a generator.
We have a full-time generator now, that's automatic. But we went for decades with one that you had to pull to start. And it wasn't until I started working from home, my own business, and I'd say we'd lose our power. And I said to Bruce, I have to have reliable power if I'm going to be, working from home. And so we got the automatic not that long ago.
No,
I love it.
It's a luxury, but it's also just a necessity, I think, in this day and age. I want to go back. I think there's something very Maine-centric about how you had sheep and they would go out to Ragged Island.
Yes.
Can we go back to that? When you were still in Brunswick and had the farm, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Take me there.
So I tend to go down the rabbit hole with anything I do.
That's the second time you said that.
Yeah. And it is the essence of my life is that, and I'm a lifetime learner. And we had this farm, gentleman's farm, but we didn't have anything but dogs at the time. We had a couple of German short hairs. And I was into spinning and knitting and dyeing. I took a lot of classes in those things. And I decided that if I was going to spin, I might as well have a sheep and a rabbit. I wanted Angora and I wanted wool. And so Bruce agreed. And I don't think he had any idea what was ahead of us. But so we had to get under electric fencing. And we had about 15 acres around our property, but we had 2 fields that were mowed. Bruce had been mowing. So we had an area on both sides of the house that we could put electric fencing around. And so we spent our weekends and nights putting the electric fencing up. And I told him that I had heard about someone that had 2 sheep that they would give me because they were they were going on a trip or something. And I said, can I borrow your truck? This is where we're going to dive into this. And
I love it.
Yeah. And so he said, sure. And so I went by myself in his truck to pick up the sheep. Well, lo and behold, I think there were 3 sheep. There might have been 4 sheep, and there was a goat. And the fellow convinced me that I had to take this rather large, full-grown goat, Daisy, but just for a short term because they were going on a trip, just a short term. And so I came home with, it wasn't 2 sheep. I think it was 4 sheep and a goat, which is, if anyone knows anything about goats.
I do.
Yeah, you can't control them.
No.
You can't contain them. And lo and behold, we lived right next door to Skillen's greenhouse.
Oh, I know where you were living then. Okay, sure.
Yeah, it's where the doctor's office is now.
Yeah. You're closer to the New Meadows down there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, keep going.
So the 2 sheep was great. The goat story is a whole different story, and we managed, although the goat got away a lot of times and would end up sometimes like in the house eating our plants, or love to jump out of whatever pen we put him in and tip the garbage can grain barrel over and spill all the grain all over the 90-foot barn. The goat was wherever the goat wanted to be.
Did you ever have the goat stand on a vehicle? Yeah, ours did.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we used to have goats when I was a really little kid. We promised as a family we'd never do it again.
Yeah.
And then the old saying in Maine, at least where I grew up, was if you want to build a fence to contain a goat, the way to test if it's going to work is to take a 5-gallon pail of water and try to throw it through the fence. If any water gets through the fence, that will not contain a goat.
Right.
Because you can't contain a goat.
Well, it's absolutely true. And the barn that we had was had been a cattle barn.
Same as mine.
Yeah. And so we thought for sure we could just put him in one of the side pens that was pretty high, and we actually added some height to it, within an hour the goat was out, and our barn was 5 stories tall, and the goat would go up the stairs, and the rickety round stairs that go all the way up, and he'd be up on the top story, which how the heck do you get that goat back down again?
They can climb a cliff.
Yeah.
So I know that at some point when you and I were talking earlier, you mentioned that you were bringing your goats out to the islands at one point?
Well, sheep. We brought...
I'm sorry, sheep.
Yeah,
right.
Okay, so we started with 4 sheep, and within 2 or 3 years, we had 40 sheep.
Oh, you had a sheep problem.
We had a sheep problem. Of course, I'm spinning, and the sheep I got weren't the best wool. So we had to research, Romney or, some other kind of wool that was better, and I'd have to pick up a few sheep. And then our sheep were breeding, and we weren't doing anything to prevent them from breeding because it was fun to have more sheep. And pretty soon we had 40 sheep on these 2 small areas. And we thought, there's a big history in Maine of sheep going out to islands. There's Ram Island, there's Sheep Island, all these island names. So we were friends with a fellow who was the caretaker for Ragged Island. And they lived on Yarmouth Island, and they had a couple sheep at the time. And so Bruce knew this fellow because of lobstering with Bob Waddle, Quahog Lobster. So Bruce talked to the fellow and said, what do you think? Or maybe the fellow mentioned that. I can't remember who came up with the idea, but they said, why don't we take the sheep out to Ragged Island for the summer? And so it was quite an adventure because we had been told that sheep don't like to swim. And so we had lined up a bunch of lobster friends with their boats, and everybody had their dinghies, and we drove the sheep in truckloads down to the Quahog Lobster and marched them down the ramp onto the float and started putting them in the dinghies, like 5 sheep to a dinghy to go out to the island. Turned around to go get some more sheep, and all of a sudden, bing, 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 the sheep are all jumping out of the dinghy into the ocean. So we had, I don't know how many sheep were in the ocean all at once, but we were just laughing, and all our friends were there. Matt Waddle was there. We had to figure out how to get these sopping wet sheep that could very easily swim. They were good swimmers, and we had to manage to get them out of the water onto the float. And we figured out that we actually had to tie them to the dinghy. And if any of you have seen if you've seen the Island Institute cover picture,
yes.
It's a classic one.
Yeah, it's got a Grand Bank story full of black and white sheep.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's what he got that idea from us. We had done that, and friends of ours had pictures, and I think that fellow called us and said, "How did you do it?" But that's exactly what we did. Is we tied a rope down the center and had the sheep coming off it. A whole bunch of boats.
Yeah.
Took them out to the island, end of the summer, we told our friends that we were going to have a roundup party, and everybody brought food, and we did picnics, and they brought kids. We had, I don't know, 20 or 30 people there with small children running around.
Great.
And then the grown-ups we figured out how to circle around where the sheep were. We were kind of walking quietly in all directions around the island and kind of trying to herd them towards where the boat was. And we had built this pen to try to capture them, just a plastic twine kind of pen that we could corral them into. And we were chasing the sheep. People were running, jumping over rocks, and it just was remarkable that no one ever got hurt.
No dogs involved?
No dogs.
Okay, you needed one.
We needed one.
Yeah.
But everybody just had so much fun. But it was a challenge to try to get all these sheep. And then...
So, Evelyn, why would you bring your sheep out to an island? Can you explain that?
Oh, it was wonderful because sheep on an island can fend for themselves completely. They're completely independent. They find their own water and their food, and their wool is just beautiful at the end of the summer because they've had that salt air.
Yeah. And there's no predation. You're not worried about coyotes.
There's none at all. And the sheep were so healthy when they came back.
And there must be an advantage to the ecosystem on the island.
I think so.
I mean, they're fertilizing the soil.
Yeah.
They're cutting undergrowth. I can't put my finger on why, but there's a long history of Mainers bringing their sheep to islands in Maine.
Well, and I think probably from a disease point of view too, where you have sheep are prone to diseases when they're in close quarters, and you put them on the island. And we would go out lobstering or fishing, and often we'd go by, and Bruce was lobstering out around Ragged, and he could see them on the rocks. They were just having a wonderful time.
Yeah.
But the funny thing was, we did several years of herding them at the end of the summer, and then the woman, the caretaker's wife, the third summer, I think, started going out there shaking a grain can.
Brilliant.
Regularly. And we didn't know this. So we went out the end of the season to go round up the sheep. And she said, wait a minute, you guys just stay right here. And she shook the grain can.
And every one of them came.
Every one of the sheep came. And it was so funny, but it was almost disappointing because the fun was the challenge. But that's what we did. And then we kept the sheep until I was pregnant with my second child. And Bruce was often, when the sheep were lambing, he was often not always around. And so it was my job to be able to help or corral the sheep to get them in a safe place when they were lambing. And here I am pregnant out to there with a small child. And at that point, we just decided that we'd done the rabbit hole in the sheep, and it was time to back off.
Yeah, you need to pick up a new addiction.
Right.
Yeah. And that turned into fly fishing.
That did.
So let's take a short break, Evelyn. I've loved talking with you. I love hearing your stories. Again, I cannot believe we haven't met until today because I think we have so much in common. But let's take a short break. Let's come back and let's talk about how your life transitioned into fly fishing and what you did with it.
Okay.
On this Flyline Flashback episode, we're going to focus on the DeLorme Map Company. The DeLorme Map Company was founded in 1976 by David DeLorme, who, after being frustrated over obsolete backcountry maps of the Moosehead Lake region of Maine, vowed to create a better map of Maine. DeLorme combines state highway, county, and town maps as well as federal surveys to produce the Maine Atlas and Gazetteer, which was printed in a large format book with an initial printing of 10,000 copies, and marketed them out of his car. The Gazetteer listed bicycle trails, canoeing and kayaking trips, and museum and historic sites, and proved to become quite successful and popular. Around 1986, the company expanded to 75 employees working in a Quonset hut in Maine and produced maps for New England and upstate New York. In 1987, the company produced a compact disc with detailed topographic map data of the entire world. This early success resulted in contracts with government and private businesses eager to adopt this new technology. In 1991, DeLorme began vending the most popular street map CD in the United States, as well as one of the first mass-consumer CD-ROM software products of any kind. By 1995, DeLorme owned the largest percentage of the market share for the CD map industry. This same year, the company partnered with the American Automobile Association to produce the AAA Map & Go, which was the first CD product to generate automatic routing. It also introduced the DeLorme GPS receiver to work with these maps. During 1997, the company relocated to a new corporate campus in Yarmouth, Maine, that featured a giant model of the world named Eartha, the largest rotating globe in the world, and featured a retail store where their current products could be purchased. During 2005, DeLorme became the first company to sell a USB GPS device and marketed this new product for less than $100. On the heels of this breakthrough, DeLorme also began selling GPS modules, allowing other manufacturers to add GPS to their products. In early 2016, the DeLorme family decided to sell their successful company to the Swiss GPS giant Garmin, which pledged to continue to operate the business in Maine and keep Eartha open to the public based on the request of the DeLorme family. In most secular and in some non-secular circles in New England and especially Maine, the DeLorme Atlas and Gazetteer is often referred to as the Bible, in casual conversation and especially around camp. And now, back to the second half of this episode. Evelyn, welcome back from the break. And we've learned so much about you already. I didn't know that Bruce was a lobsterman. You mentioned about him going hunting and fishing. Did he start to get you into fishing?
Oh, absolutely.
Tell me about that.
He always loved to fish, and would take me. When I was in high school, we used to find little rivers and fish for the, tiny brook trout, little native brook trout. Not fly fishing so much in the very beginning, although he was fly fishing. I was completely intimidated by fly fishing, and I was his biggest supporter in getting him into it. I bought him a really nice fly rod. He had a few friends that got him into fishing and had lent him gear, and he had an inexpensive rod, and I got him a nice fly rod. But he would try to get me into it, and I was just really insecure about my casting.
Yeah, sure.
And I didn't want to embarrass myself, but I didn't mind going with him. Sometimes he would go up and I would join him and sit in the front of the boat and with a good book, sometimes some, bottle of wine. And then if nobody was on the pond, I would play around with the fly rod a little bit. But as soon as anybody showed up, I would tuck it away and pretend I was, just keeping him company.
Can you put a timestamp on when that might have been?
Oh, that was in the late 70s, early 80s. And so he, like I said before, he's always been my biggest supporter. And he kept saying, Evelyn, nobody cares. Nobody, most of the guys that come out here aren't all that good at it. And don't worry about it. You're fine. And he said it enough times. So I finally believed him and took a chance and just became obsessed. But I also came at it from the point of view of back to my hands, doing things with my hands. I started fly tying in the early 80s at Ella Bean, and it wasn't because I wanted to fish with the flies. I just loved, when I was a child, one of our neighbors had a fly tying desk and at Sebago Lake, and I saw him at the desk. He had me come over, and I was absolutely enraptured. Is that the right word?
Yes.
By how he was doing it, and all the material and the tools and the, just watching that, and it nothing to do with fishing. It was what he was making.
It's crafting.
It's crafting, absolutely, and it just in the miniature scale. So. As soon as I got out of Bowdoin, I think I waited till after Bowdoin. I started taking classes at Ella Bean, their fly tying, when they had them in the cafeteria, not at where Ella Bean's is now, but where they're manufacturing whatever it is.
Across the street in South.
Right.
Yep.
Across the street. In fact, nowadays I bump into people that I met in the 1980s at the classes. There was a group of us. I think I was the only woman there. I took the class several times because at that time I realized it wasn't just the craft. It was the community of fly tyers. We all got along. Just that whole community of shared interest. So back to Bruce and fishing. So I found that Bruce was really pleased with me to fly tying because I wasn't using the flies and he could use them all. And his buddies were all jealous that, he had a wife who would tie flies for him. I didn't always tie what he wanted to fish with. I tied whatever I felt like tying. So it wasn't always that practical for him.
Yeah.
But once in a while he would tease me enough and I would, tie some Adams or, something that he was used to fishing with. But the first time I really got addicted to fly fishing was we had at least one or two of our kids with us. We were up in Caribou Pond, the backside of Sugarloaf, in a small canoe with a very active German short-hair pointer puppy. So picture the chaos. We're in this boat and the puppy's going back and forth. And Bruce says, Evelyn, why don't you put one of your flies on? And I tied on one of my flies that I tied and I made a cast. And oh my gosh, a fish came up and snapped at the fly. I had the tug is a drug. I mean, I got the tug and I was I probably set the hook so hard that the fish flew behind us. I have no idea, but I was so excited to put the fly tying together with the fly fishing.
Yeah.
So that was, after that, it was, he was going to have to share his flies with me because I was going to start fishing much more.
And you did.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I want to go back. I know there's a really fascinating story because of a conversation you and I had before about your great-grandfather. Tell me about your great-grandfather. Tell the audience about your great-grandfather.
Well, it's quite a heritage to have. My great-grandfather was Dr. Luther Halsey Gulick, and he was born to a family that were missionaries. So he was born and traveled a lot during his life with his parents as missionaries, but he got involved in promoting athletics. He went to medical school in New York City and got involved with the YMCA. And it was partly because he was going to help the YMCA convert from being just an organization for religion and Christianity and morals and hygiene and try to get them more involved with athletics, because his vision was the whole body, mind, and spirit. And so he was encouraging, they were doing gymnastics, a small amount with a Y. Well, he ended up running the physical education training department for the YMCA, which was in Springfield, Mass, and is now Springfield College. And while he was there, right out of medical school, I mean, he was 20, in his mid-20s, he was training the trainers that would go back to the YMCA and train with the gymnastics or whatever programs were going on at the Y. And they needed trainers because at that time, most of the trainers were coming from circuses or, different background where they were great with their athletics, but they didn't have the Christian morality. And he was trying to train people, so that they all were within the YMCA program. And one of his students was James Naismith. And he had given an assignment to the whole class of trainers to come up with a program the next day that would be appropriate for inner city. Anyone from any background could do it with minimal training and minimal equipment. And so James Naismith came back with this idea. He had a peach basket and a ball. And he said, that's all you need, peach basket and a ball. And Naismith and my great-grandfather worked together as part of his assignment to develop this game where there were 8 players on each team and they had 2 peach baskets and a ball, and they came up with the rules. And lo and behold, it became basketball, the game of basketball. And a lot of the rules they came up with then are still the rules in effect now. And then this was over in the fall of that semester.
When would this have been?
1891. They came up with the game of basketball in 1891.
Thanks, Evelyn, for making that. Yeah.
And so, but it was in the fall. And so at Christmas vacation, all these student trainers went back to their YMCAs and brought the game of basketball, and it just took off and all across the country through the Ys. And my great-grandfather, Dr. Gulick, soon became the head of the physical education department for the whole Y. And helped promote. They came up with some of his students came up with the game of volleyball, and badminton was a spin-off of the basketball, and it was supposed to be for people that were a little more genteel and couldn't, exercise as much. And so he left the Y at some point and went back to New York City and became the head of the physical education department for all of New York for the schools. And in that role, he was trying really hard to bring athletics to the school programs and integrate body, mind, and spirit. He also, backpedaling a step, he gave the YMCA their triangle. He designed the triangle that they still use that has body, mind, and spirit on each side of it.
I can picture it, Evelyn.
Yeah. And so with the physical education for New York City, he developed a national playground association and just trying to promote anything outdoors for kids. And then he and his wife, this is a abbreviation of everything that went on, but he and his wife, Charlotte Vettergulick, during the same time he was doing all these other jobs in the summer, they would run a family camp in Connecticut where they brought their friends that had young children, and they bring all the children together and they kind of organized this girls' camp, family camp, and realized that was such a success. So they bought a couple miles of shorefront on Sebago Lake. And in 1910, they moved their family camp there and started bringing other children to it. And there was another group in Vermont at the same time that was sort of going along the same line. So they integrated together and formed the Campfire Girls of America. And like the next year or 2 years later,
These are your ancestors.
These are my ancestors. They incorporated, Charlotte Vettergulick went down to D.C. and incorporated the Campfire Girls. And Dr. Gulick, my great-grandfather, was the president of the Campfire Girls for many, many years.
He's a really big deal.
It was really neat because what I'm most proud of is that he was ahead of his time in thinking that women, not only were sports important in the body, mind, spirit, but he also promoted that women could do anything men could do, that there was no reason women should be doing different sports, or women should be, inside when men were outside doing things. That he, in organizing the Campfire Girls and the girls' camp, they were taking women out of their home environments and bringing them into the woods. And where in that day and age, it wasn't that common that young girls were allowed to do that.
So let's talk about Camp Wohelo.
So my great-grandparents started Camp Wohelo. They raised my mother there. Camp Wohelo was still going on. It was called the Luther Gulick Camps after him. She was raised at camp and was a camp director when I was born. And therefore, I spent almost every summer of my life until I was probably 15 at camp for 2 full months every summer. We lived on Sebago Lake in cabins with no electricity, no running water. There were, we called them BTs, blue tents, and that's where the bathrooms were. And we, it did everything outdoors. It was learning outdoor skills. And so I have very limited memories of my academic years when I was young, but I have vivid memories of being a small person in the woods, building fairy houses with moss and acorns, and learning how to build a fire, and sailing. Sailing became my life passion. And that's sort of where the water runs through it, starts the pattern of that.
Yes.
Because we were living in Montreal at the time, but spending summers on the lake, spending time swimming and then sailing. And then when I got older, to the older girls' camp, I sailed competitively. And I just always, loved being on the water. So when it came time for us to have our children, I said to Bruce, I was working for myself at the time, but I wanted to take summers off from, I closed down my research job and took the kids and did the same thing my mother did, where I spent every summer from the time our youngest was 2 until she was 15, I think. I spent as camp director, so that our
You
girls.
became the director.
I became the director. There are two parts of the camp, and I became the director of the younger girls. But so I always had this passion of promoting sports and outdoors to young people, young women specifically. We had a son at the same time, and he went to the boys' camp eventually.
So it was an integrated camp. It wasn't a girls' camp.
It was a girls' camp, and so he was there. We had we called it Tiny Wohelo. When my kids were really little, they were at camp and did all the camp things, but they had a counselor and lived in a house by themselves.
Sure.
And then when Seth got old enough to not really belong at the camp, he went to the boys' camp, Camp Tomatis on Panther Pond.
Yes.
But camp really gave me the motivation, the desire to be outdoors, the motivation to empower young women, empower counselors. Actually, one of my favorite things about it was taking these college-age kids, starting with kids straight out of college, and trying to help them learn the skills that they needed to parent these campers, and then problem solve with them all summer and build a community. Because camp, if you just walk in from the outside, it's just structures and a beautiful place. But when you're in camp itself, there's all this history and there's so much magic that goes on, but you can't give someone that magic. You have to help them find it. And finding that enthusiasm and that love of the outdoors, trying to help these college kids, that really, I enjoyed that.
So, Evelyn, I just know in my own experience growing up in Maine that most of the camps tend to recruit from certain areas. Does Wohelo have a kind of a demographic that the kids come from? Are they from New York? Are they come on scholarships? I'll let you finish that.
Yeah, when I was camp director, we had some kids from Europe. We had quite a few kids from Venezuela at the time. A few people come from Venezuela, and then all parts of the U.S.
Yes.
And then the counselors came from great backgrounds. I mean, we had a lot of really qualified counselors, and then we would bring some over from Europe, Camp America.
Got it.
And those girls would come with amazing piano skills or dancing, or they were picked because of their qualifications for specific things.
So international even.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of international. And we had some kids on scholarship, and I think they've done a really good job of keeping the scholarship, bringing inner city kids in as well. But I feel like that those years as camp director and having the great-grandfather who was promoting women long before, promoting what women can do, kind of made a natural progression towards starting a group, the Maine Woman Fly Fishers.
All right, let's go there.
Yeah.
That's why you are here on the podcast. Is really, that's why so many people know you. But the backstory is so fascinating, and it really lends so much to the story of what that program was. So my chicken or egg question is: did you join Sebago TU first, or did you create this organization and attach it to that? Because I don't know any of that.
Yeah, no, a friend, Lou Zambello, was on the board at Sebago TU at the time, and he had run into me a couple times on the river, and knew of me, and he just reached out blindly one time and said, I was sitting in an office in Portland at that time working for lawyers there, and he called me in this long conversation about why I should join Sebago TU, and that they wanted to do something to promote women. He didn't know exactly what it would be, but he said he thought if I could join the board, that I would come up with something. And I at first was kind of skeptical, but I accepted the challenge, and fairly quickly, went to a couple meetings and came up with this plan. And we had I think I joined the board in the late fall, and we were going to have our April annual meeting. And I conned this friend, Jessica Sullivan, and Lou Zambello's wife, Lindsay Rustig.
Yes.
And I said to them, and this other girl, Olga Booth at the time, she's since moved away, but I said to them, will you guys help me? What I want to do, I think, is just have a table at the annual meeting and have a bunch of books and fly tying stuff out and just get women's names and get their names and email addresses. And we can promote maybe a day on the water or something like that, but just to, see what interest there is.
Great idea.
And oh my gosh, so many women came over, and so basic. And what we did was we came up with the name Maine Women Fly Fishers, and we did this poster. In fact, it's right over there. Maine TU Sebago chapter, Maine Women Fly Fishers. Yeah. And we put that out, and we made it look like we were a going entity. We knew what we were doing. And we got a couple of the guides that were going to be auctioning days items off at the show. We got them to volunteer to take some women out. And so we had this list of, this is what we might have meetings. I think what we did was you fake it till you make it.
Yeah. We build it, and they will come.
Yeah, build it and they will come. And it was unbelievable, the enthusiasm. And so the first couple of times, I said, okay, so my background at camp, I was thinking building community. It always works better if you've got some food, if you meet in a fun environment and, maybe learn something, try to have something that people will take away from it, like a skill they'll learn or, and just have fun. And so we had a couple meetings at Sea Dogs in Portland, and people were so excited. We had Bonnie Holding come to one of the first meetings, and I said, we're going to have Bonnie come, and she's going to talk to us about casting for recovery.
Yeah.
And she was so excited, and, she showed some pictures, and we chatted it up. And then one of the guides, or a friend of mine, donated a weekend up north, his hunting fishing camp on a remote pond, like 20 miles off the grid, completely no cell coverage, nothing. And he said, you can take a group of women there. And so I got, Jessica went, I don't think Lindsay went, but we got a group of people together. This was, I think, our first big fishing adventure with this group, and went for 3 days, 2 nights. We had to, drive on the paper company road and get to where a four-wheeler was put. And then we had to load everything into the four-wheeler with a four-wheeler trailer and drive through the woods. I had to drive a four-wheeler, and I didn't know how to drive a four-wheeler, down this bumpy thing, down to this cottage on the pond, and nobody there. It was the most amazing experience. And it was one of those situations where we're women, and we usually have our guys or someone around to take care of us, but we're completely here on our own. And if anyone gets hurt, we talked about it, what we have to do. We had such a good time. It was really, really neat. And that was a moment where, empowering these people to believe they could do it and doing it on our own. And I think I quickly realized that women can learn from men, fine. And there's so many wonderful husbands and guides that will help women. But when women are left to their own devices and there's no inhibition, a group of women fishing together, they're less apt to be embarrassed. Like I knew I was embarrassed to cast from a boat when there were guys around, when I started out. And Bruce was the one that said, you can do this. Don't worry about it. And so I wanted to be that person that told these other women, you can do it. Here are some ways to get better, but just go do it. And empowering the women, it was really fun. So we started with that trip. And then we quickly I used Facebook as a way of promoting it. We actually didn't use very much money at all from TU. Everything we did was we raised money on our own, or we did it without funds. Like we had all our monthly meetings, and we would take a little bit of money to help pay something for the guide, a meal for the guide or whoever was talking. But we had between 9 and 20 events a year. I think it was over the course of 6 years. I talked to all the guides I knew and had them come and talk about their specialty. When Judy Camuso was appointed in her role as commissioner, within 2 days, I contacted her and I said, would you come and talk to the Maine Women Fly Fishers group? And she was happy to do it.
Judy's on the podcast. Did you know that?
No,
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Season 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll have to listen.
She tells a great story, and she deserves that role.
Yeah,
She's a great woman.
She is a great woman. She was so gracious with us.
Listen to that podcast; you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, and then so we had monthly meetings, and I always had them at a place where you could get a beer and some food, and people came and ate, and then we would have a speaker.
Perfect.
And then we did. I organized a bunch of guides to do 4-pay trips where, like Richard Bear was one of the guides. I think John Wood might have done it too, where we sent groups of 2 anglers, women could sign up and go. And then we got into the overnights. Lakewood Camp, we went a number of years in a row, and we'd go for a long weekend. And I organized, I did the background of it, would contact the lodge. We went to Weatherby's as well, contacted the lodge and reserved a bunch of rooms, and then, would help the women sign up, and then would be there to help them with flies. We did education in the evenings when we were doing it. But the women were they fed my emotions, my ego, because they were also happy and having fun and laughing.
What did you learn?
Oh, for me, I learned the pleasure of sharing, building community, and just empowering these women and sharing with them. And I felt so grateful because so many people in my career becoming a guide and a fly caster, so many people helped me.
Yes.
And to be able to give back and to see how rewarding that was.
Yeah.
And to build a community. I mean, like, where you and I realize how many people we know in common, and it makes it so comfortable.
Yes.
It's so fun when you get a group of people together and you have a common bond. We also did Fly Gals on the Water. I think it was 5 years in a row. We opened it up to 18 novice fishermen. They didn't even have to belong to you. And we just said, if you sign up, I will organize. And I got all my friends, anyone that was fairly good at fishing, to be there. And it was like 1-on-1 or two sports to one. And it was Fly Gals on the Water, to get 2 women on the water with a helper. And they didn't have to, the Fly Gals didn't have to have any experience. It was put a rod in their hand, put them in the water. The guide is just helping them flick the fly out.
Yes.
And trying to get them on fish. And we got we did that most of the day. And then we would end it like at Sea Dogs or someplace with a slideshow, much like you did with your taking pictures when they were rafting, whitewater rafting. I would take pictures. I actually would go from venue
during the day,
venue to venue, because we had everybody split up because there were 30 something of us.
Yeah.
And I took all these pictures and I'd put together, of course it was digital, so it was a lot easier.
Yes. Immediate. Yeah.
And I brought a screen and a projector, and we'd have dinner together, and they would see pictures of themselves fishing. And that was really when I realized the social media part of this is huge, because if these girls would get in waders, I got waders from TU and from Casting for Recovery, and they would be dressed in waders in the water with a fly rod and sometimes with a fish. And in the evening, when they saw their picture on the screen and said, that's me, it just cemented it. And then I would email the pictures to each person.
So Maine Women Fly Fishers,
yes,
was just a natural extension of your skill set that you had learned through a helo.
Yep.
You applied it to this way. So Louis Ambello succeeded at getting you to do what he asked you to do. But the other thing too that happened that you haven't said is that you decided that you needed to ramp up your skill set.
Right.
If you were going to be working with women and teaching them, you wanted to learn how to do it in a way that the learning part was meaningful and quick. So what did you do?
Well, so it started with Casting for Recovery. Bonnie Holding was a friend, and she was doing Casting for Recovery, which I thought was a really noble program, and I wanted to do it. And she was running these weekend retreats, Casting for Recovery, and I wanted to help her. And she had qualified help already, and I didn't have space. She didn't have space for me. And I said,
wow, good problem to have.
Good problem to have.
There you go, Bonnie.
Right. But I said, my problem then was I had to become so valuable that she needed to have me. And so I decided to go to guide school to become certified as a fly fishing guide. I wanted to learn the skills that Bonnie could use for casting for recovery. Well, lo and behold, it worked. Bonnie started having me at Casting for Recovery in 2011, and I've done it every year since. And then after doing that a year or two, I realized that this is before Maine Women. No, this is over the same period as Maine Women Fly Fishers. I wanted to get better at casting, teaching casting, because I had seen how women struggled with it and how I had struggled with it. And I knew there was an easier way of communicating to teach someone and for me to learn it. So I took 2 different years in a row. I took the fly fishing casting school from L.L. Bean, and Rod McGarry was in it. I remember meeting Rod the first time at L.L. Bean's, one of their fly fishing weekends, and he had kept up with me after that and wanted me to do the casting school. And the whole point of my goal was to learn the few words that you could use that would make a difference, and how you can empower a woman or anyone to feel confident and therefore to be able to get better at fly casting, not to be as shy, and to be able to use positive words entirely, never to say, don't do this, but rather to say, try stopping your rod when you're pointing the tip at the top of the trees. Instead of, don't let your rod go down to the water. Try stopping your rod, see what happens. Or what happens if you stop your rod in the back facing the sun or the moon or whatever. And I was so impressed. Rod McGarry and Macaulay Lord were teaching the class. The first year I did it mostly just to get my casting better. The second year I did it with the idea that was more reasonable, that maybe I could try to get certified through Fly Fishing Federation. Macaulay Lord, both Rod and Macaulay were amazing teachers. Macaulay, I just remember him helping me, saying just those first few words that would make me understand. He's the one I think of often about how few words you need to say and how the tone of your voice and everything is so important. But Rod and Macaulay were very supportive. And then Rod said, if you want to train to take the test, the CCI Certified Casting Instructor test, I will be your mentor. Well,
you were in good hands.
I was in good hands. And he had this other girl, Lainey LaCase, who took the second class with me. She drove down from Moosehead area, and the two of us were under Rod's weekly tutelage for so many months. I mean, he gave so much of his time to meet us at Payson Park in Portland, and he worked to get the language better, our way of teaching more accurate. And he went through the test every step of the way, each item in the test. This is what they're going to ask you to do. How are you going to do it? Well, this segued perfectly with the Maine Women Fly Fishers, because at that time we were starting to offer casting instruction for free for the Maine Women Fly Fishers. And I came up with that idea. Let's do it just the way Rod was helping us. I said, let's meet in Payson Park. And 2 or 3 times a year, we would meet in Payson Park, and I would set up the TU rods and get all these beginning casters. And it was a 2-way street because everyone was so excited, but also it helped me practice, and it gave me the language, the comfort, fake it till you make it. Well, I was faking it still, but I was getting to the point where I wanted to be tested to see if I'd made it. And I eventually took the test in July with Lainey LaCase. We went down to Massachusetts and we were tested. And during the test, I kept saying it was Sheila Hassan and her husband.
Sure.
And Sheila would, say, "No, tell me what you would do, with the forecast or, some question." And I said, well, when I'm working with the Maine Women Fly Fishers, with the girls, I will say such and such and such and such. And then I would demonstrate it and show her. And at the end of it, I found out I passed. I couldn't believe it. I was totally in shock because I was not prepared to pass the first time. But she came over and she said, "So tell me about this women's group. Did you just make that up for teaching purposes?" So I said, no, this is for real. But it was perfect because I had practiced so many times with real women, with people.
Yeah.
And Lainey passed too. So the two of us on the way home, we were just ecstatic. But Sheila was they were wonderful, helping us. So
that's a great story. Yeah. So Evelyn, with the success that the group was experiencing, what kind of support were you getting outside of the group?
Oh, that's a great question. When we did the Fly Gals on the Water, a number of the board members, the Sebago TU board members would come and helped us with that. They pretty much gave me free rein, which was a real gift in itself. But then they also helped reach out to LL Bean, and LL Bean donated 2 casting instruction sessions each year for several years, and I believe they're still doing it. And that was a wonderful opportunity for people to go after work in the evening and go for a one-night event. And then LL Bean also donated some waders and some women's fishing gear, different auction items.
Oh, cool.
So they were very generous to the group.
So you were getting supported by the industry as well as just
Yes.
the interested individuals around.
Well, and part of what I wanted to do with the group was also showcase the industry, like to try to bring in the local guides and have these women to meet someone like Richard Bear and to know that they can reach out to him, to be for a guide. And then we also had, by going to Weatherby's and going to Lakewood camps, I wanted them to see that you too can do this on your own. You can go to Weatherby's and stay, and just to show them all that Maine had to offer, because Maine it's such a playground for the fishery.
And there's plenty of room for women.
Plenty of room for women. And we always joked about it that I would tell the women, when you get to a fishery, the guys that are out there fishing love to give you information. And if you ever get to a place where you can't figure it out, go talk to the gentleman you see on the river. They almost always will tell you something. They're not going to tell another gentleman.
That's right.
Yeah.
I do it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not threatened by you at all. And they'll be big supporters, be encouraging you and step up, if you need help. I said, I didn't ever want there to be barriers. All I wanted to do was create an environment where women felt empowered, but we also had men that came to the meetings. And we were we had a number of husbands that came almost every month. We'd have a meeting. They would show up and be there and ask questions. And, and some people might have preferred that it was a closed community, only women, but not in my mind. My mind was there's so many resources that are offered with all these other gentlemen. And Bruce is, as I said, my biggest fan. I mean, he goes everywhere, helps me with everything. And I wasn't going to run an event that he wasn't involved in. And I loved it that other gentlemen felt comfortable too.
No, I think that makes perfect sense, because once you are out on the river, you are going to be integrating with any stranger, and that might be a man or a woman or a child. So why set the stage incorrectly?
Yeah.
Right. So there's probably a few people you want to thank.
Oh my gosh.
Because Evelyn, you tell a great story, but must have been a large support system along the way.
Yeah. Well, number one is having Bruce as my partner and soulmate through the years. He's done so much to encourage me in every aspect. And then really Rod McGarry and Macaulay early on just were great mentors and devoted a lot of time to help me. And then Bonnie Holding was just, she was always out there she was running a fly fishing school and she was doing casting for recovery. And I just always enjoyed sort of trying to follow in her footsteps. Then in the very beginning, there were people like in the Maine Women group, Sonia Dorr and Ella Linton and Lauren, it was LaChapelle, Margaret Clark, Megan Hess. I mean, all these people that came out of the woodworks and really helped form the core group. And I actually called them a core group, Hannah Horrigan as well, and it became a core group to support me in the Maine Women Fly Fishers and just provided so much help. I mean, they're just, there's so many people, and I'm sure I've forgotten a bunch of them, but I feel so grateful for everything I've been given, all the time and knowledge that I've been given. And I think that was what really inspired me with the Maine Women, was to be able to give back.
Yeah, it does. I was recently listening to someone speak about salmon restoration, and they said that the people that seem to make the significant changes in the world are the people that show up.
Yes.
And the list of people you just gave, and also what you've done. I mean, you showed up at the door at the law firm to say, I'm here to get into the legal field. You showed up to Sebago TU to say, I'm here to help.
Yep.
And did. Camp Wahilo could always count on you and your family. And the legacy that you bring is just incredible. And I think it's great. And you have shown up in every way that you could. And you even showed up to the podcast today. So, Evelyn, I also know that you've been recognized for a few distinctions. I know that at one point, wasn't it the Portland Press Herald listed you as one of like 10 Mainers to be thankful for?
Yes.
And then also 50 Mainers you need to know. Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
From Maine Magazine?
Yes.
I know you don't want to, brag, but what happened there?
Well, both of them came out of the work that I was doing with Maine women fly fishers, and the 10 Mainers to be thankful for was such a surprise. Deirdre Fleming she reached out to me and told me that she was thinking of doing this, and I just couldn't believe it. I think that was the most meaningful thing, because it's my gratitude to everyone else that I want to share. And for her to be showing gratitude to me, I mean, I felt like I didn't deserve it, but it was wonderful. And the rest of the Maine women fly fishers were so excited to see a woman fisherman on the front. It was a big picture on the front page.
So for the audio podcast, I'm looking at the front page of the Portland Press Herald. Deirdre Fleming was the outdoor editor until just very recently. She's retired. We love Deirdre. And who is the largest photo of? Guess what? Evelyn King. And you're standing there on the side of the river in a pair of waders with a vest overstuffed with gear, and you have a very happy look on your face. Maine Magazine.
That was a trip too. Totally out of the blue, I got an email saying that they were, the Maine Magazine was going to do another. I guess every year they do 50 Mainers to recognize, and they were focusing on people that were sharing their outdoor knowledge and promoting Maine. And lo and behold, they wanted me to be one of the people that they were showcasing. And so they sent a photographer out, and we went on the Royal River and had such a fun time taking pictures. And then they had a presentation at St. Joseph's College.
Sure.
Yep. Really elegant. I mean, it was just a beautiful banquet. And there were so many people that I knew that I really admired that were being acknowledged the same year. And it was fake it till you make it. I felt like a total imposter at that. I mean, I did not deserve that recognition, but it was such a trip to see.
I disagree completely.
It was wonderful. And that was really fun, because Bruce's mother was still alive then, and my parents, my mother's still alive now, but my father was alive then. And for them to see me getting recognition for something that I love to do, that was a trip for them. They really enjoyed it.
Evelyn, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And I hope you enjoyed this time that we shared together, getting to know each other and really starting to kind of explore the story that your life tells.
Oh, I was so honored that you asked, and I was nervous about it, but you made me feel at ease, and I really appreciate what you're doing. This is great.
Thank you, and our audience appreciates you being here today. That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for joining us for this intimate discussion, and thank you for listening to Flyline Podcast. A new Flyline Podcast episode will be released every 2 weeks on Tuesdays, so be sure to come back to meet our next famous guest. Until then, this is Michael Jones, and we invite you to visit the blog section of our website to enjoy photos and contributions from our guests and experience all of our episodes at flylinepodcast.com.